I'm here to introduce and welcome. You guys all right? Okay. Just make sure you guys are situated.
We're good.
Okay.
I just wanted them to move so the two latecomers could sit by the door and not be so.
Perfectly fine. So this is Erica Ravenwood. She's here to talk to us a little bit about diversity, and we've heard great things from Ginny, so we wanted to make sure that we invited her to our campus, and she did come from Geneseo today, so she came all the way here on a snowy day to talk to you guys today. So give her your full attention, and welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I was told that you've already done Safe Zone training.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? All right. So you probably heard a little piece about transgender. I'm going to go in depth. All right. And my goal today is for you to leave this room understanding what it means. You know, what I do, I've done several seminars. I do a lot of teaching. I have a website. I've written a book. And what I teach really is psychology. And what I teach is what makes us similar instead of different. I'm going to show you a film. I'm going to show two films while I'm here today. The rest of it I'm just going to be drawing on a board so that hopefully you'll see what I'm doing and you'll be able to explain it to other people using the same method. The first film I'm going to show you, though, it's called What Transition Means to Me. This is my second time, actually, that I've transitioned. I lived 3 years full-time from 2006 to late 2009. Went back in the closet and then decided to transition again fully in August of 2013. All right. So this first film is called What Transition Means to Me. All right, just to give you kind of a background of who I am, and then I'm going to go into some psychology that just pertains to everybody. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines transition as a passage from one state, stage, subject, or place to another. It also defines it as a movement, a development, or an evolution from one form, stage, or style to another. When we talk about transition from a transgender perspective, most people think about what is seen physically. A transition of the body, a transition of clothing and mannerisms. But those are just external things, some of which can be done or not done, and still achieve transition. To me, what is important in transition is an acceptance of oneself. That acceptance can be made in the absence of surgery and regardless of the gender expression someone wishes to adopt. Gender expression, after all, exists on a sliding scale for all of us, whether cisgender or trans. The gender of the individual remains, regardless of the clothing being worn or the mannerisms that may have been adopted. My gender isn't dependent on my clothes, my makeup, or my shoes. I do love shoes, though. I believe gender is a matter of how we process information. It's very well known that men and women think differently. It's a common complaint of women that they can't understand men, and a common complaint of men that they can't understand women.
And that is because we process information differently. My difficulties navigating this life have been because it was expected that I should think like a man, when the simple fact is I think like a woman, and that is what encompasses my gender. When I was in the military and trying to run for my gender, I could do my job very well, because women are just as capable of being a good soldier as men are. But what was difficult for me, and something I never managed to do, was build the camaraderie with the men I was going through so much with. Because the fact is, I simply couldn't understand them. Transition is an evolution. And if you believe that centers most heavily around the body and clothes, you would be mistaken. The biggest piece for me has been to allow my brain to function the way it was supposed to have all along, and simply stop fighting it. As a result, I don't rethink things to match something that would resemble more male. I no longer second guess as to whether something I say or do is acceptable. I just do. And as a result, I've thrived this last year. I'm far more outgoing than I ever have been in my whole life. I have far less fear. And I am far less awkward in social situations. In short, I can accomplish far more as the woman I am, rather than the man I tried so hard to pretend to be. I've had no surgery, and there's a good chance I never will. But you know what? I've transitioned.
I try to get to the next film before I have to get there. Yeah. Is that right? All right. We'll get there. We got to figure out how to raise this back up. It's magic. I don't know how to turn that off though.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to be going through a lot of information, and I hope you guys want to participate.
I know you can.
Sorry.
It should be in that direction.
Should be.
Yeah.
Just want to be able to get that.
That's displaying for the PCs.
No, but that's in the
Yeah.
But that's the light.
I can draw.
Gotcha.
All right, so you guys know, like I said, I do a lot of teaching, I do a lot of speaking, and, excuse me, I didn't bring my water, so I'm sucking on candy. I want you to not be afraid to ask questions. Anything you have a question about, I want you to ask it here today, all right? It doesn't matter, even if it's private, personal, I will answer any question. Now, very quickly, did they go through, when you did your safe zone training, did they show you something called the gingerbread concept? Little gingerbread man, got these 4 things? No. Oh. All right. Well, we're going to go through that today. Because if you don't understand this, then you don't understand what it is to be transgender. And so the concept for this is every one of us. This doesn't explain transgender. It explains everyone on the planet. Every one of us has a gender. Your gender is your thought process. It's how you process information. Every one of us has a sex, some kind of physical makeup. That is your physical body. Every one of us has a sexuality, even if you don't like sex. The T, there we go. And every one of us has a self-expression. Every one of us. There isn't a person on the planet that doesn't have all four of these things. But none of these determine any of the others. Your self-expression does not determine your sexuality, it doesn't determine your sex, it doesn't determine your gender. Your sexuality doesn't determine your sex, it doesn't determine your self-expression, and it doesn't determine your gender. Your sexuality doesn't determine your sex, your expression, or your gender. But all four of these things come together in us uniquely to make us who we are. I'm going to go through and explain each one of these things. Because in order to understand it, you have to break it apart. So we're just going to be talking about those four things. Sex is probably the easiest. It's just your physical body. That's all it is, whatever parts you happen to have. Not everybody is born boy or girl. There are also people that are born intersex. Have you ever heard that term before? So your parts are just whatever your parts happen to be. If I were to have surgery, my parts would be whatever they happen to be after that surgery. And that's your sex. But it in no way determines my gender. My gender is something I was born with. Sexuality, hopefully you know what sexuality is. Now, it's very common for people to think of being transgender as a sexuality. And it's been confused that way for a long time. It's still confused that way. And there's reasons why people associate being transgender with the sexuality. One is the sharing of an acronym, the LGBT. So we think of LGBT sexuality, T must be sexuality as well. Going back in history to the beginnings of the gay movement, it goes back to Stonewall in 1969, I believe it was, where a group of gay men in drag were arrested, and that was really the beginnings of our modern gay movement. Well, later, the transgender community embraced that as well, saying, well, that was our start also. But really, I don't know if those people were transgender or not. Some of them could be, some of them may not have been. But they were self-proclaimed gay males who were in drag at the time when they were arrested. So again, we associate being transgender with sexuality because of a history. The other things that have people associate being transgender with the sexuality come from some stereotypes. And the historical stereotypes, there's really been three. I'm not going to say they're negative, but they're porn star, prostitute, and sexual deviant are the three things that are associated sexually with transgender people. But there's reasonings why somebody goes into that field. And there's a second film that I'm going to show you. It's called Transgender Population. And I'm going to talk about, in that film, some of the discriminations that are still legal today. And so the reason that many people who are transgender have gone into the porn industry or have gone into prostitution is because they're not afforded jobs. It's legal to say you cannot have a job because you're transgender. They still have to feed themselves. They still have to put a roof over their head. And very often they were seeking money also for surgeries that they needed for their treatments because none of these things were covered. So these are some of the reasons that we associate that. But having said that, my sexuality being transgender is just the same as anybody else. I could like guys, girls, or sock puppets, just like anybody else could. What my sexuality is just what my sexuality is. It has nothing to do with what my gender is for myself any more than anybody else. Does anybody have any questions on that? No? I'm going to want questions. Now, self-expression. I've labeled it self-expression. More often than not, when we're talking about this subject, it's labeled gender expression. But, what is gender expression? At one end, you have feminine, and at the other end, you have masculine. And gender expression is measured from a baseline of what we think of as stereotypically male or female within a society. So today, today, dressed as I am, I'm further at the feminine side of the scale. When I go home tonight, I could probably change my clothes if I wanted to, throw on a pair of sweats and a t-shirt. And I've changed my gender expression. But my gender has never changed. Within society, within the baselines, you have certain societies where those two things are closer together. So what is feminine and what is masculine may be far closer. To be seen as feminine, it may just be a pink t-shirt versus a blue t-shirt. And you have something closer to a center here. Versus extremes of femininity or masculinity. For women, we experience this more so than men do. More times than not, because what we're allowed in our self-expression falls anywhere on the scale, anytime that we feel like it. It's perfectly fine for women to wear pants, women to wear dresses, we just enjoy a greater variety. And so we can fall anywhere within this scale, from masculine to feminine. But this is just gender expression. Gender expression also is how you interact with people. It's it's mannerisms, it's expression. And again, it's just based on stereotypes of what we think of as masculine or feminine. That's all it is. Does anybody have questions on this? Really? Because, go ahead.
So you said that for women it's easier to be on the scale. So for men, is it just because it's maybe looked at differently?
It's looked at differently. Yeah. And there's reasonings behind that as well. And it kind of goes back to sexuality again, really. For a woman to wear men's clothes, it isn't seen as something sexual. There's no fantasy attached to it. Whereas for a cisgender male, I'll explain what cisgender is, to dress femininely is often associated to a sexuality, a sexual fantasy of some sort. So those are the differences. And that's why, and it's just whether we see it as socially acceptable or not. Is there any other question on it? No? Now, very often, these things are rolled together. There's a lot of discussion within politics right now, and for transgender rights and different things. And very often I find that the people writing the policies don't really understand what gender is. They assume that self-expression, gender expression, well, you're wearing a dress, so you must be a girl. But I have a lot of friends that are tomboys, that are transgender females as well. So what is gender? Gender is how you process information. The reason I'm female is not because I wear women's clothes. The reason I'm female is because I was born with a female gender. I was born with a male sex and a female gender, which makes me transgender. Cisgender. Cis is a Latin word that means aligned with. And if your gender and your sex are the same, you're considered aligned. And you're therefore considered cisgender. That's where that term comes from. There are other gender types besides male and female. Now, I'm going to discuss, have you ever heard the term gender dysphoria? Yeah, a couple of you, some of you know. Never heard of it? Gender dysphoria is the reason a transgender person seeks treatment. It's because they experience gender dysphoria. And what gender dysphoria is defined as is a lack of alignment between that person's gender and really their physical presence. So if you were to take one hand and call it your physical presence, and take your other hand and call it your gender, and bring them to eye level and go like this, it's hard to see the separation, it's hard to see the difference. That is cisgender. That's where everything's in alignment. For a transgender person, they're not in alignment. And this causes horrible, horrible discomfort. The treatments are meant to bring those two things into alignment. Now, there's different ways of doing it. Self-expression. In my film, I said that I hadn't had any surgery. There is a procedure I would like to have. I may or may not have it. But because I've adopted a self-expression that I enjoy, that matches my gender more closely, I brought these two things closer into alignment and alleviated a lot of my gender dysphoria. Have you ever heard the term genderqueer? Yeah, some of you? Genderqueer is a blending of male and female thought process. That's what genderqueer is. There's a term called binary. Have you ever heard that beyond computers? It's a term called binary. And what binary is, it's a gender thought process that is either male or female. My gender is binary female. I've always thought, I always have processed information strictly in a female way. If you're male, and you think of yourself strictly male, you're considered binary. It's just a word. But it helps when talking about different gender types to understand that there's binary male, binary female, and then genderqueer, which is a blending of these two things. Now, a lot of people who are genderqueer will say that they don't experience any discomfort. They don't experience a lack of alignment because they're good with what they have here and they're good with what they have here. So there is alignment, so they don't have gender dysphoria. There's another thing called gender fluid. Has anybody heard of that? Gender fluid is where the person feels that their gender moves from male to female. Now, in talking to numerous people who express that they would identify as gender fluid, they've also expressed that their gender dysphoria comes and goes, which makes perfect sense because these two things are coming in and out of alignment. When they're out of alignment, they're feeling, oh. When they're in alignment, they're feeling okay. Does anybody have any questions on that? Go ahead.
How did you know, like, when did you first know? And how did you know that you weren't thinking like a man?
I would say that I knew at 3. But I actually knew at 5, because that's when I started school. And once I started school and was around other children, then it was very obvious. Particularly when I was made, because they used to do segregation back then for some reason. Boys and girls were segregated. And I was always made to go be with the boys. So my gender dysphoria actually started at 5 years old. And that's when it started. Prior to that, I stayed home with my mom, my grandma. And there really wasn't any, don't do that kind of stuff. So I just went and did what was natural for me to do. It just happened that those natural things were all little girl things that were natural for a little girl to do. And then I was told just before I started school, you can't do that anymore. Sure.
Do you think if you had a fatherly figure, I'm not saying you didn't have one around, that you would have grown up or changed a little bit differently, or do you think you still
No,
felt-
because you're talking about the nurture effect. Yeah, no, I really don't believe that's the case. I just had a psychologist ask me, because, again, even within psychology, they attribute sexuality to gender for whatever reason. And I was asked, did I think that sexual trauma would affect a person's gender? And my answer was, it would affect their sexuality more than their gender. Your gender is going to be what it is. Does that make sense? Yeah. Let's see, what else do we have to go over? Gender is the biggest piece. I want to make sure that you understand what gender is. No other questions? Do we have any psychology students in here? Yeah? You don't have any questions? This isn't quite what you're being taught.
No, I mean, so, I don't really like too much clinicians, but when I do, I find it interesting their transition from Bruce Jenner to Caitlyn Jenner, which I think we're all aware of.
Yeah.
So, his daughter in one episode asked him, so you like females, does that make you a gay transgender person? I thought that was really interesting to kind of stick a label on it. Like, how do you feel about kind of...
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how I feel about it, and how many, many transgender people feel about it. I've interviewed hundreds of transgender people. I view my sexuality through my gender. So the label I give myself is based on my gender versus my body, which is different from a cisgender person. We usually give our sexuality label based on body parts. For transgender people, because this is where we are primarily, this is where we all are primarily, it's just that for the transgender person, there's the separation. I do like guys, so I always consider myself straight. You know, even though I've never had surgery, but I still consider that's the label I give myself. Now, what else? If somebody else gives me, it's completely up to them. But I will tell you this: the reason it took me so long to come out of the closet was not because I was confused and didn't know if I was a girl or not. I always knew I was a girl. The reason it took me so long to come out of the closet was because I had a fear of being seen as gay. And the reason I had a fear of being seen as gay was because I started getting beat up when I was 7 years old for being gay. I was 7 years old, I didn't have sexuality. But that fear was beaten into me. And so I stayed in the closet until my 40s, before I finally had the nerve to actually say sexuality doesn't matter, and I'm going to come out. Does that make sense? I think there was another question within that, though. We were talking about Bruce Jenner. No?
I mean, like, as far as healthcare, and like,
Sure.
I guess my question is like, you said that as far as jobs, like, it's legal for a transgender person not to receive the same job. I'm wondering, as far as like healthcare, is that the same? What kind of struggles, if there are any?
Well, just recently, the government said that we're going to cover SRS, sex reassignment surgery, under like Medicare. The procedure that I would like is called an orchiectomy, which is a much less invasive procedure and would resolve all of my surgical needs. But right now it's not seen as a viable treatment by the medical community. The reason being is because a lot of it's run by men, to be honest. And they're kind of iffy and squiggy about that area. And say, don't cut things off there. We're not going to approve that. But for me, I was born with an extra protein. So I've always produced, probably wasn't until puberty, but I've always produced high amounts of both estrogen and testosterone. And I've been on HRT for 2 years now. HRT is hormone replacement therapy. I've done that for 2 years now, and the reason I have to do that is not to get my estrogen to a female level, because apparently it always was. It's to suppress the testosterone. So I have to take estrogen in order to suppress the testosterone, as well as a testosterone blocker. If I were able to have the orchiectomy, it would remove the testosterone factory, and I'd be able to go off everything altogether. But right now, it's not seen as a viable treatment, so it's not covered by insurance. So, yes, there's some discrimination there. But it's a lack of understanding. Go ahead, Marty.
Doesn't some of this matter state by state, though? Like New York State, I know that their Cuomo was pretty big in passing like top surgery qualifications, but other surgeries aren't being recognized. Does that matter state by state?
It is. It's all piecemeal right now. Yeah. Any kind of rights, right now there are no statewide complete rights for transgender people in any state. It's all piecemealed. Some of it comes down to this city will give you protections, but that city won't. In the neighboring cities. As far as the level of discrimination that's legal, even now in New York State, there's still no protections really. So if I were to go to a job interview, they could tell me flat out, I'm not going to hire you because you're transgender. If I'd been there for 20 years and was the perfect employee, they could say, well, you got to go now because you want to transition. You're transgender, go away. And it's perfectly legal to do, but you can't do it to anybody else. And housing can be denied. Services can be denied. All this stuff can still be denied legally to a transgender person just because they're transgender. Actually, just because they're open about it. It's rather ironic. Most transgender people never actually come out of the closet. And the reason being is because they face such discrimination. I really don't have to tell anybody I'm transgender. I don't have to say a word. Most people just don't even know. But I'm a spokesperson, so everybody knows. But most transgender people like to kind of fly under the radar, and they call that stealth. And so they'll very often move to other states and to start a new life, hoping that nobody ever finds out that they were transgender at some point. That was another thing I wanted to talk about too. Cisgender is an alignment. It's an alignment between your gender and your sex. So if a transgender person, and the only ones that are going to be seeking treatment typically are your binary transgender person, either male or female, or occasionally your gender fluid, but they're probably not going to be seeking surgery. If they did, they'd probably continue having dysphoria some of the time, because all they've done is trade it. But really, if you think about it, after a transgender person has surgery, and everything for them is in alignment, they could actually adopt that title of cisgender at that point, and just kind of ditch the transgender part of it. Any other questions? Now, the film I am going to show you, it's called, it's about transgender population. And what I'm trying to do within this film is to break the myth that there's only a few transgender people. There's a survey just done in September, but the survey before that only listed the transgender population in the U.S. at 0.5%. It's like 700,000 people throughout the entire U.S. are transgender, according to the survey. The worldwide average is upwards of 5% or higher for the worldwide average of transgender people. Well, that doesn't tell us that there's less transgender people in the U.S. It just tells us that we have a more highly closeted transgender community than other parts of the world. So hopefully within this film I'm going to be able to show you visually, and I think, look at that
You got the
learning.
negative.
Oh.
Don't leave me messing around, guys.
I'm speaking to you through the internet. The World Wide Web has become the prominent ally to a population living in fear. A population in hiding. There are many reasons why a transgender person is afraid to be known as transgender.
Yeah, I just
And all involve a fear of anticipated negative consequences from other people. As children, it could include a fear of being ostracized by other children.
in the right corner.
A fear of bullying that could exist,
And then right
or
click
a
and hide
heightened
list.
experience of bullying that already
and then right
exists.
click and do what full
Hide list.
A fear of
That's being on
disappointing
the
parents and loved ones. I'm speaking to you through the internet. The World Wide Web has become the prominent ally to a population living in fear. A population in hiding. There are many reasons why a transgender person is afraid to be known as transgender. And all involve a fear of anticipated negative consequences from other people. As children, it could include a fear of being ostracized by other children. A fear of bullying that could exist, or a heightened experience of bullying that already exists. A fear of disappointing parents and loved ones. As an adult, it can include a fear of loss of employment, family, friends, a fear of taunts, and even physical violence. There is no choice in being transgender. You simply are or you are not. The choice that exists is in whether or not to hide that fact. A choice can be made by the person to be something they are not, to pretend to be something they are not, and live with the intense pain that brings. That, in fact, are the choices. To hide for others because you don't wish them to be hurt, and be in constant emotional pain yourself, or to choose to take the risk that there is less pain waiting outside that closet door. The reality of what is waiting outside that closet door is different for everyone. What waits outside that closet door isn't so much in the power of the one coming out, but instead lays largely with those who are on the other side of it. It's generally known and in large part accepted that about 10% of the world population is gay. Differences in statistics from country to country and place to place are due to both migration to more welcoming areas and the amount of fear instilled to keep people closeted. That equal distribution in births doesn't change, however. The chances of having a gay child is the same regardless of geographical location or social construct. This is easiest to see if we remove all borders and view the world population as a single entity. Regardless of the true percentage, the percentage is what it is for the entire world population. The population of gay people evenly distributed throughout the entire population. We then place people back within borders, subject them to varying degrees of acceptance and non-acceptance, take into account the migration of some seeking tolerance, and you have the illusion that we live with in terms of viewing one area of the globe more gay or less gay than another. Due to migration of gay people seeking tolerance in the United States, we have what are thought of as gay areas. The fact that people migrated to find tolerance proves they in fact were born other places. Being transgender is not a sexuality, but the same equal distribution applies. The occurrence of transgender people being born is equal to that percentage throughout the entire world population. Just as there are certain areas more open to gay people leading to migrations, So also, there are certain areas more open to transgender people. Migrations have taken place for transgender people seeking tolerance. These areas of migration are not necessarily the same area as gay people have migrated to. The perceived gay population has grown, if you believe statistics. But in fact, what has happened is fear has been reduced, so more people feel safe enough to admit they are gay. The transgender population is no different. Extreme fear is what gives the illusion of small numbers. Being transgender is a natural occurrence, and nature strives to achieve balance. This is what creates equal distribution of transgender people throughout the human race, just as it is for gay people, or cisgender people for that matter. New surveys will be taken, the accuracy of which is dependent on people feeling safe. Progress has been made in this area, but not near enough to provide an accurate number. What new surveys will show us, however, is an indication of how much fear has been reduced since the last survey, and how much more work in reducing fear still needs to be done.
So, I do this right. How did we do this before? We just press
Laptop.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Coolness. All right. So to go back to your question earlier, as far as if I had a stronger male influence, would I still have ended up transgender? Basically, all that does, that influence, is you can suppress. It'll force you to suppress things because you don't want to, disappoint. But it's not going to change what your gender is. For myself, growing up, because I'm 51 years old, so I started school in 1970, and it was right at the start of the gay movement. And I really kind of blamed the gay movement for my getting beat up all through school. Because it became dinner table conversation in Southern California. And people were kind of upset by that. So I'm sure that's where the kids heard those words originally, that I was being called and then beaten up for it. I didn't understand why it was, because nobody explained it to me until 8th grade, believe it or not. I turned around in the bathroom after when some guy was going to beat me up, and I said, why? And he explained it to me, and I was horrified. I was like, oh my God, really? Between 8th and 9th grade, I changed schools. I also grew 6 inches. So I was 6 foot tall at 14 years old. And decided that, well, if this is the reason that you're beating me up, I'm going to hide everything I can. And I'm going to try to appear as male as I possibly can. And so I became an exaggeration of that. I was more male than male. Just as a way to protect myself. And started bodybuilding and doing all that stuff. You saw the pictures. Those were all pictures of me. And so my going into the military, there's nothing wrong with going into the military, but I had to go into the infantry. I could settle for nothing else because I had to be John Wayne, in everybody's eyes. And so when I got into the infantry, I couldn't just settle for the infantry. I had to volunteer to go out and do all these crazy things. So my first job was as an Army Scout. That was my first job in the military. I went to sniper school, went to air assault school, went to combat lifesaver. I got trained as an armorer. I was a weapons expert. I dealt with explosives. I was accepted to Special Forces training, and then went over to the Gulf War. All these things as a way to move myself as far as I could to people seeing me as male. And it was a way to protect myself. Now, I've gotten a chance to work with transgender kids now because there is more coming out. And as we learn more, parents become more aware to actually look at their kids. And so I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with transgender kids, but it's also very heartbreaking, even today. Not a lot has changed, to be honest, between the time I was a kid and the way kids are treated now. But I have a 5-year-old that is in kindergarten, and she says, "I'm a girl. I am a girl," and it's a family of divorce, and so you have one side of the family saying, "No, you're not," and another side of the family saying, "It's okay." Well, this causes a lot of confusion in the child, obviously. Now, the school has been supportive. They see the kid every day. They see her for long periods, so they know who she is. But these are still things that we're going through. A couple other kids that I have worked with are now just entering their teens, 13 years old, 2 boys, transgender males. And the difficulties they are going through, it's heartbreaking for me because I see the same exact difficulties I went through. There's being transgender in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it. There really isn't. It's a difficult life now in our society as it is. But there's really nothing wrong with being transgender. There's nothing wrong with the fact that I'm female. But when I was 9 years old, I became suicidal. I started being suicidal at 9 years old. And it was simply because of the way I was treated. And so my first attempt was at 13, where I cut my wrists. And then there was subsequent, too many to even count, suicide attempts. For transgender people, the suicide attempt rate, this is the attempts, not just ideations. These are attempts, is over 41% of transgender people have said that they've attempted to take their life at least once in their lifetime. It's horrendous. That's amazing. The general population is only 4.6% in relation to that. So we're talking about 41% of transgender people. Any questions? Please. Even if it's for curiosity, just ask. Go ahead.
It's completely unrelated, but living in Geneseo, do you think that community, that type of community, is welcoming to transgender or LGBTQ?
I work with a group of women. We're the Livingston County Rainbow Alliance, and so we work with schools, hoping to get them to set up gay-straight alliances within the schools.
My little sister, or I live in Geneseo.
Oh, do you?
And my little sister, she's lesbian.
Yeah.
And she just started high school. She's helping along with this new club that she and a couple of girls petitioned to make. They did a LGBTQ.
Did they really?
Yep, they made a club for it.
Wow, I have a meeting tonight. I'm going to be talking about that. Because we've been trying to, I live in Geneseo too.
If she's been trying to get that still going, she talks to me all the time. I tell her about my faith on training, and I tell her about this.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know what you thought of
Right.
MCO.
I mean, I haven't had an issue. I had mentioned that I lived full-time for 3 years prior to. And what I did was what so many transgender people did. The year of 2006, I had a nervous breakdown. Complete nervous breakdown. It lasted the whole year. And November of 2006, I jumped in my truck, brought nothing with me, and drove all the way to Bakersfield, California. Straight through. I'm running. And then once I got there, I went boy to girl overnight. And I lived there for 3 years. Horrible thing to do. Don't try it. Now, it was a horrible experience for me. And I don't think it was just that it was the worst part of town. I don't think it was just because we had shootings on an almost nightly basis. It was because I looked afraid. And I find this a lot when I talk to transgender people. they're scared. They're scared to death. They're afraid to walk out their door. And when we show fear, then we look like a victim. We look easy, you know. The second time through, I knew there was two things I wanted to change. One was my voice, because I used to do speaking for a company, and I trained my voice extremely deep because I was still in guide mode. You know, the beard, that was me 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now. I trained my voice extremely deep, very baritone. I was all rumbling in the chest. And looking like this, it just shocks people if that voice comes out. So for those 3 years that I was in California, because I hadn't changed my voice, I was afraid to say anything. I just didn't talk for 3 years. And so the second time through, I said, I'm changing my voice. Couldn't find anything as far as voice-changing techniques, except if you wanted to pay $300 per lesson to go see some voice specialist or something. So I made my own, and it's published as well. Basically, all I did was 2 hours every morning, picked one song. It was Foolish Game by Jewel. And I played that on a loop 2 hours every morning for 30 days. And it moved my voice. It changed my voice. So it translated into a speaking voice. The other thing that I was determined to do was not to show any fear, which is easier said than done. Because when you walk out the door, particularly having the past that I had, and what so many transgender people have, of any time you take a step out of that closet, you face such abuse, that there was nothing to tell me that wasn't going to happen again. But I was determined never to show fear. And so for the first 6 months, it was a fake it till you make it kind of thing. I was scared to death. I was petrified. Well, I'll be damned if I was going to show it. And after about 6 months, because I got positive feedback, nobody was trying to hurt me or say nasty things, then it turned into real confidence. And then once you have real confidence, somebody's going to mess with you anyway. They might say something behind your back. They're not going to say it to your face. I have a friend who works in Wisconsin at a transgender center. We were talking on the phone one night, and she said, I can always tell transgender people. And I thought she meant, by the way they look. And she said, no, they just always look afraid. I just look for the people that look scared, that look petrified for no reason. And they're probably transgender, which is really a horrible statement of how we treat people in our society. Are there any other questions? No? Has anybody here had interaction with somebody who's transgender? Yeah? Wow, a lot of you. And are they able to answer your questions? Yeah? Were they able to answer your questions beyond just themselves? Very often, that's why I got into training, doing this stuff, and doing the research that I did, was because I found the information was very POV, point of view. And so if you're talking, it's like Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner can answer for Caitlyn Jenner. She can explain Caitlyn Jenner, but that doesn't explain me. Or, probably very many transgender people. Not everybody is binary. She would be considered binary female. But I find so much that the training being developed or the things being talked about is simply from that person's point of view versus trying to explain the entire thing. That's why I go through this, because that explains it. Yeah.
What is binary?
Binary would be either, it's your thought process, it's your psychology. Binary is either male or female, and nothing else. Genderqueer would be a blending of the two, and then gender fluid is a moving back and forth. Now, gender fluid, that's a hard concept to wrap your head around. Does anybody know anybody that's Gender fluid? Yeah. It's a hard concept for me to wrap my head around because there's not consistency in it. You know, it's like, really? Kind of moves. And somebody who's interested in psychology, that's a difficult concept to come up with. But I've never experienced the male gender either, and I know it exists. So I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, because I've talked to enough people that have described the exact same things. Yeah.
So from an RA perspective, let's say a resident came up to us and said, I think I'm going to something, I don't really know what to do, other than providing assurance that I can take you to counseling. In your opinion, what would be the ideal situation for us as RAs to do?
Well, support. Be supportive. Yeah, absolutely. For anybody, anybody who's come out of the closet about anything, the closet, all the closet is a secret that you're hiding behind. So for anybody to tell a secret to someone, it takes a lot of guts. You have to get up the nerve to do it. And so if you meet something negative, when now you've been brave enough to share that, it's devastating. It really is. And it really kind of throws you back in the closet when you get those things. So if somebody comes out to you, know that they're offering their trust that you're not going to stomp on them. As far as what they need, then they would really have to, it takes a lot of self-reflection. And I'm really trying to get this concept more and more within psychology, because a lot of psychologists don't even understand this, quite honestly. They're taught something different. They're taught something more of a Freudian school versus what I'm teaching. But if the psychologist understands this concept, what we're looking at doing then is creating a treatment plan for that individual. Here's another thing too. Right now, if you were to walk into a psychologist's office and say, I'm transgender, there's usually this preconceived notion of what that means. And within the reason that the orchiectomy isn't seen as a treatment for me is because they've said, well, this is the treatment for transgender people. So if you come in and say, I'm transgender, they stick you on a conveyor belt, basically, as far as a treatment. And say, you have to go to counseling, you have to go to HRT, you have to get surgery. And we've really set this up as the only viable option. But it shouldn't be. I shouldn't have to have surgery if I don't want it. But it's shocking to me how many times that I've had people in the mental health and medical communities say, just go ahead and get the surgery. It's covered now. Isn't it easier? Really. It would just be easier to have that invasive surgery that I don't want. But what we're doing is we're saying that, well, we need to make you acceptable again. You were acceptable if we saw you as a gender of male and you had a male body. You were acceptable at that point. But now you're telling us your gender is female. Well, now you need to have a female body or you're not acceptable to society. And that's basically what we're telling people. And this is keeping people from seeking treatment very often, because it's a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be tailored to the individual. Margaret?
So I have a friend who's transgender, and she, one thing I hear from her a lot is that she feels like she's fetishized, and that is how people look at her once they find out.
That label is put on her? Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Do you find that happens with you?
Yeah. I just started with a new psychologist. And I have fun with psychologists because I get to teach them. But I had asked her the first time we met, do you have any other transgender patients? She's like, oh yeah, we have a guy who's a cross-dresser. And I was like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about then, do you? because that's where the fetish comes into, and that's what leads back to being transgender seen as a sexuality again. Because, and this might be a little bit uncomfortable to hear, but I'm going to say it anyway, because it needs to be talked about. I'm not saying that cross-dressing is bad. I'm not going to say that. Within sexuality, so everybody okay if I talk about sexuality for a second? Within sexuality, in order for a person to achieve orgasm, we all develop a fantasy. Every one of us. It's very rare that you're sleeping with a guy and he doesn't turn into Chris Hemsworth at the last moment in order to get over that peak. We all develop some sort of fantasy in order to achieve orgasm. Now, what's considered a fetish is when that fantasy becomes externalized. And that's all cross-dressing is. It's an externalized fantasy that can develop at some point and then just becomes more and more. So, you know, where I get mad, which is stupid because I do love shoes, anything in my size, you know, I'm looking at these 7-foot platforms, and you know, it's like, come on, seriously, is any woman in her right mind actually going to wear these things? They're designed for cross-dressers, and they're so a lot of the shoes that I look for, because I wear a size 12. Well, size 12, you must be a cross-dresser. We're going to give you the 7-inch platform heels. So yeah, there is quite a bit of that, and I find myself having to explain it a lot. It's the reason that I have nothing against the LGBT, but I do feel that the acronym being joined as it is creates more issues than it does resolve issues, because we continue to think of being transgender as a sexuality, and that really is the major hurdle that transgender people have. People don't really have an issue with me being a girl. They just don't. It's their notions about sexuality that people get hung up on. And that's really the hurdle that the LGBT faces anyway. But it shouldn't be transgender people's also. Everybody has a sexuality, so we all have that hurdle. But it shouldn't be lumped in to what we're trying to do as far as teaching about what is gender versus sexuality, or anything else. Any of those other three. Questions? Anything? It's got to be a question. Curiosity. No? Go ahead.
So I hear from people sometimes like, well, if someone can decide to change their gender, then I'm black now, or I identify as a turtle now. Like, how do you respond to that, or do you even entertain that with a response?
Well, if they tell me that I can't change my gender, I'll tell them they're absolutely correct. I cannot change my gender. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a surgery is not going to change your gender.
Right.
Let's go through this scenario. If let's say we kidnapped a guy and forced him to have SRS. At that point, we've made him transgender. Because when he went under the knife, he had a male gender, and now he's welcomed with something that is closer to a female body. Mm-hmm. He's going to have that separation. Okay. He's going to have that lack of alignment at that point. He's going to experience gender dysphoria. And we've made him transgender. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, there's another example that some people kind of grasp onto, and it's the case of the intersex person. Very often, when an intersex child is born, any of us, the reason they put male or female on our birth certificate was because the doctor held us up and said male or female, and that's what went on our birth certificate. Well, for the intersex child, very often they'll make a determination and ask mom or dad, which would you like? Do you want a boy or you want a girl? And so we're starting to get away from that notion of doing surgery on children, because they're finding very often that years later they have to do surgery again because they didn't get the gender right. You know, you can assign a sex to a child, but they didn't get the gender right. So then they have to do corrective surgery again. Yeah.
So I fully believe that you should be able to have surgery or not, depending on individuality.
I'm very stubborn, so I'm not going to.
Well, it's really invasive. But I was speaking with a transgender person who went through with having the surgery because they were fearful of emergency medical response.
Yeah.
So getting in a car accident, getting, someplace where they couldn't advocate for themselves.
Right.
Do you have any fear about that, or like in extreme situations not being able to? Like,
Do I personally know?
The ambulance comes and they won't treat you because they're.
I had to go. I went in the hospital for the month of October, this last October, and the reason being was because I had to. Thankfully, the phone was within arm's reach. I had stroke symptoms, complete left face droop, left side gone, and so I called the ambulance and they came. And I got on the gurney and I told them, I said, you need to know I'm transgender. Because for medical reasons, you need to know these things. And so I just told them I didn't have an issue. Not one. And when I was, each time, because it was something that took me from Dansville Hospital to Strong, ICU, neurology, and then over to Unity Hospital for rehab. At each point, they always listed me as female in the record. And I just see that more and more often. I just saw a new doctor because I'm switching my care from the VA to something local. And so just went to my new doctor yesterday. And I didn't fill out any, I didn't say male or female in any forms or anything, but I got the form back and said gender female. So, things are starting to change, particularly in the medical field. Yeah. They're starting to become more aware of these things. And they need to be, because there's going to be more and more people seeking treatment. As we reduce fear, more and more people are going to come out of the closet. And, part of, the reason, like I said, I didn't have to tell anybody I was transgender. It was kind of amusing, actually, because when I came back from California and went in the closet, I'll tell you what, coming out of the closet is hard. Going in the closet is devastating, soul-crushing. And so I became so depressed I was agoraphobic for 3 years, totally agoraphobic. It had to be midnight before I would check my mail. And I would have my son do my grocery shopping for me. I wouldn't leave the house. When I decided to come out, then I actually started leaving the house. Thank God. But it was funny because I live in an apartment complex across from Geneseo College. And the people, I guess they'd always nickname me as the weird old guy. You saw the beard. I was the weird old guy. They only saw me like, very rarely. And so when I transitioned my look, my appearance, they thought I was a nurse that was coming to take care of the weird old guy. And there was absolutely no reason I had to tell anybody I was transgender. But I feel it's important. It's necessary. People shouldn't have to live in hiding. To change who you are so you're comfortable without actually being comfortable is a horrible thing. To live with that fear, because being in the closet is fear. That's what the closet is. It's just fear, And to then go through all that stuff to change yourself, to make yourself more comfortable, but to go to another closet. I'm not transgender. I was born female, whatever. It's moving from one closet to another, and it's just maintaining a fear. And I find that that's the biggest piece within all of this, and it's fear not only that the transgender person has. I mean, we live with a lot of fear, but it's fear that everybody else has about people who are transgender. There's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of negativity, throughout the Bible Belt and the Midwest. They're all, shaking their fists and saying no. But it's because they're afraid, and as we learn more, we just lose our fear.
So I understand what you mean about moving from closet to closet, but
Yeah.
What if somebody let's say does transition to female and they just don't feel the need to come out as transgender because they finally feel like I am
Absolutely.
So as long as it's coming from a place of
I
self-acceptance.
just, I don't care what anybody, you do whatever you need
Right.
to do for yourself. I think it's very sad if somebody maintains that fear
Okay.
for the rest of their life, Because I know a lot of people that have. They had surgery years ago. They're just scared to death. It's just awful. I can't let anybody know where I'm at because people are trying to kill me, kind of thing. It's just horrible, horrible stuff. So, really, when I came out, I decided I'm coming out, and not just for myself, but to show other people it can be done. And, luckily I've had the smooth road that I have. To be honest, I live without fear. It's great. I'm not afraid of anything except snakes. Everybody's got a snake. It's one thing on this planet I do not like. But yeah, I actually live without fear.
I think too it's important to mention it's not necessarily fear of physical abuse, it's also fear of abandonment and that your whole family and loved ones will
Oh,
destroy you and
absolutely.
eat you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because oftentimes we associate it with like you're gonna go in the bathroom and be beat up. But it's also like a severe fear
No.
of like everyone you know walking away from you.
Yeah, loss of family and friends, loss of job, loss of house, loss of loss of everything that you have. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of reasons to be afraid. There really is.
There's been talk of us offering gender-inclusive housing so that somebody does identify they could be placed in a spot that may be more comfortable for them.
Right.
Do you think that that would allow more people in the college age to feel more comfortable
Coming out?
about?
Absolutely. And, I've actually I wrote up a form it was for any schools really, but it was in response to some kids in middle school, and it was a gender identity declaration form. Because really, we don't know anybody's gender unless they tell us. Otherwise, we just assume. When I had a beard and was the weird old guy, everybody assumed that my gender was male. Because I hadn't told them. So that declaration form allows you to say, this is who I am. Now, as far as with any of it, it's easiest to deal with somebody when they are a consistency for us. So if you know that they're binary female, you just treat them as any other female. If you know that they're binary male, treat them like any other male. Where it starts getting more complicated is if the person is gender fluid, and they go back and forth because, unless they change their appearance each time, to kind of give you that hint in that external whatever that they've changed. But absolutely, if you have things in place, because think of it this way, it's scary enough to come out of the closet. It's terrifying, but you've braved that. Now you have to brave all the hurdles of where do I go to the bathroom, where do I sleep, any of that. So you not only have that fear of, am I going to get completely ostracized? But even if I'm not, now I have all these hurdles to face. So if these things are in place beforehand, absolutely. I mean, wouldn't it be better, any of us, we would rather know ahead of time what is there for us. Any other questions? Now, let me ask you this. Where's the school at with different things?
So there are, actually our student government initiated the placement of a couple of different gender neutral bathrooms.
All right.
And that was student driven, so that was awesome. And there are 2 or 4.
Now, gender neutral. Why isn't every single person bathroom
I think
gender
it's called,
neutral?
well, so it's called everybody's
Call it
restroom.
everybody's restroom.
The issue or the thing to think about if we made every bathroom everybody's restroom, it would then alienate like Muslim women. They can't go into the bathroom. So like there's some need for some restrooms to stay gender specific. I
Gender
guess.
specific. Yeah.
But there are restrooms now. So that was one thing that the schools took a step
But these
forward.
are still single person restrooms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't think like the locker rooms or anything have been talked about yet. And then for
Right.
housing wise, There's been a proposal made to the board for 2 years in a row now, and we're just waiting.
Yeah, it's difficult. They, with the schools that I do work with, Geneseo, Avalon, Livonia, Mount Morris, Dansville, they're all right on that edge of, okay, we want to just do everything. We want to enact policy, because that's what you need. You need policy in place for these children to understand this is what I get when I come out of the closet. The reason that you're finding more and more children coming out in middle school and high school is because they've hit puberty. And it wasn't that they weren't transgender before. They were transgender before. It's just that in elementary school, before you hit puberty, you're not having all that. It's not as bad. What you're being, it's bad, don't get me wrong. But once you hit puberty, then you feel like your body is working against you. And you're already going through all the hormone cycles. You're already going through the turmoil of being a teenager. But now all this is happening as well. So the reason you're seeing the kids coming out in middle school and high school more and more often now is, one, because it's being talked about more. So there is a level of at least knowledge, if not acceptance. But it's that desperation. I've hit my desperate point, and it's either I kill myself or I come out. And that's very often the two choices that a transgender person makes. I'm either going to off myself now, or I'm going to be who I want to be. Because they hit that desperation point. That's usually what forces them out of the closet. It's not like this happy transition on out. It's usually a moment of desperation. Any other questions? Is there anything I can do to help you move things along at the school?
I think we're just waiting on one person to
That one stick in the button.
take action. But a lot of positivity in the fact that within 100 miles of here, there are 6 colleges that have gender-neutral housing. So
Right.
this area of the country is at least...
It is. Yeah, things are moving. And as we get more education, it's going to make a difference. I was surprised to hear that the college across the street from me still takes it a case-by-case basis. You're transgender, okay, well, talk to the dean and see what we can do for you, rather than having policies already in place. It seems like if you're applying it to college, particularly if you know you're transgender, and you're applying to a college, you're more apt to want to go there if there's a policy already in place. I know that I don't have to, run the gauntlet of all this different stuff. Now, within the central schools that have elementary, middle school, and high school, which most of our schools are around here, they're all central schools. I've been pushing that all their single-person restrooms be made gender neutral. And the reason being is because, again, we're dealing with kids after the fact. You've already made that desperate move to say, I am, and now we're going to decide what to do with you, rather than having things in place. And trying to get people to understand that if you have a child that is in middle school who is transgender, that same child was transgender in elementary. And so all these policies need to be established all the way through. Now, most restrooms, really, what it comes down to is the faculty giving up their restrooms, because those are usually the only single-person restrooms there are. And then when you get into the multiple-person facilities, restrooms and whatnot, then there's a little bit different considerations. But if you think about it, how often do we strip down naked to go pee? I use the women's restroom all the time. It says M on my ID. I've never changed it.
I don't think it's so much have to do with that type of thing, but I think it has to do with the society we live in, and having gender-neutral, vicinity restrooms is women are easy targets. They can be easy targets to masculine men, And as a society we live in, they could be targeted in these restrooms and things
Well,
like that.
with
And I think
multi-person
that's one of the
facilities, I do
reasons.
not foresee you're ever going to have gender-neutral multi-person facilities. I just don't ever see that happening. There's always going to be a segregation, and even when we're talking about using a restroom based on your gender identity, rather than your sex being the determining factor, it's still a segregation. We're saying, okay, people with girl gender go over here, and people with boy gender go over here. There's still that segregation. So I really don't see that going away. And quite honestly, I wouldn't want to. When I'm in the women's room, I don't want, some
I
big
think
guy
what's
coming
really
in.
nice about the MCC signs too is they say everybody's restroom. They don't say like gender neutral restroom. They have like they're handicap accessible. They have multiple little stick figures. It's not just gender neutral. And I really like the language. I tried to find it on my phone, the picture of the sign.
Right.
It even has really good wording under there about what that means. And
Yeah.
it doesn't just equate for gender. It just means like
Everybody can
family
use
or
it.
in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Or like it just anyone just use this space.
Right.
Because you have a basic need and we can help you meet that.
Exactly. If you pee, go here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is just my own pet peeve. I've never liked the transgender symbol with the little half man, half woman thing. I just never really liked that. It looks like a superhero cape blowing to the side. So yeah, the symbols. But then people talk about language. Well, people won't understand if you don't have a stick figure. But I think we can get around that. Anything else? Yeah.
Is there anything that we can do in the rest house to just like make it easier for people? Just like if they are transgender, just like what are some small little things we can just put out there? Like
If you know what their gender is, treat them as that gender. Yeah. Just view them that way. Very often if a person is, particularly if they're just now coming out, because a lot of people will come out during college. College is seen as a much more friendly environment than, say, high school. High school is dangerous, Whereas college is seen more as a open-minded kind of place. So you do have a lot of people that will want to come out during college. And they even try to suffer through all those years, saying, when I get to college, I can do this. Now, that doesn't mean that their appearance at the time they've come out is going to totally match your view of what a man or a woman should look like. But the way you're supportive is knowing what their gender is. Names are important, too. Because for a transgender person, more times than not, they've known their name much longer than anybody else. I didn't legally change my name until, was it last year? Beginning of last year? But I have known my name was Erica Elizabeth Ravenwood since 1999. I just didn't tell anybody else. But that was my identity. And I always used it. I used it on my mail. I used it on my email. I used it on my social media accounts. That was me. And that was my identity. So if that name is known, it really goes a long way to using it. Yeah.
I know that when we had our Safe Zone training, we got like the Safe Zone stickers that we could like put outside our doors, and like that's a safe place you can go to your RA like to talk about that kind of
Right.
stuff. But like how you said you would have just wanted like someone just like support, like that's what you can do to like help somebody.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people don't know that they can like come and talk to us, and it would actually be like a okay thing to like open up about. How do you think we can make it? So it's very
Well, you
welcoming?
have welcome packets, correct? I assume when a new student comes in,
It's really online based.
is it?
I mean,
Is there a way to put out that information that you're safe to talk to?
We have
Like
stickers.
flyers.
What's that?
Like flyers. maybe.
Flyers, trifold pamphlet, something.
I mean, I'm sure you could put a bulletin board up just about the topic, and then that might trigger for someone like, oh, Lily at least is educated on this.
Yeah,
Maybe we can put some sort of disclaimer on our website or
sure.
some.
Now I'm going to leave with you a bunch of DVDs. All right. Now this has 5 films on it. One is explaining the genderbread concept in length, just like I did. It's got the 2 films that I just showed you. 2 others, I can't remember which ones they are. There's 5 on here, but I'm going to leave these with you. For you, Margaret, I have 1 copy of another DVD, and this is a DVD that I've been sending out to every senator, sitting U.S. senator. And what this has is some of the speakings that I did on November 20th. November 20th is the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And it's a very sad event. And I spoke for probably 2-3 hours that night. Very emotional. But there's some talkings in that. So I kind of included it as a separate thing. This is more for school. This is more for something else, but good information. And I do talk about, what I'm hoping is what I spoke about that night, because I speak a lot about kids. And I talked a lot about suicide and how we prevent it. So a lot of it is things we need to do as a society so people stop killing themselves. I also have a stack of these cards. And this is my website, thetransgendermovement.com. And then on the back is a book that I've written that I've made available online as well. It's called Transcendence. So that's there as well. Now, Transcendence is not my story, although I am writing my biography and posting it in parts on the website. But Transcendence itself goes through all the psychology and stuff. I talk about a chapter on gender dysphoria, just gender, just sexuality, just, yeah, it's all broken down. So these are here for you. Anything else? No? All right. I've answered all your questions. Do you feel like you have a better understanding? I'm not seeing a whole lot of enthusiasm with that. Do you have a better understanding? Do you feel like you understand this is transgender? And it's as simple as that. Gender, physical presence. Physical presence meaning the whole 9 yards, what people see. And those 2 things coming into alignment so that you feel comfortable with yourself. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was lovely to meet you.